Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. We're coming to you live from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We're here tonight for a wonderful reason, and that's to celebrate the launch of two new poetry collections from Dennis Cooley. That would be Cold Press Moon and The Bestiary. And we'll be joined by a very special guest who will be interrogating Dennis about the contents of these poems. But first, I'd just like to point out that after the presentation and some of the readings and the conversation, we'll have time for some questions from you, the audience. There's a Q&A button, which is just at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to enter your question at any point. Rest assured, adding a question will not interrupt the conversation at all, and your host for the evening will try to get to those during the Q&A portion at the end. I'll pop up at the end myself just to let you know how you can go about purchasing books. But before that, I'd like to introduce your special guest and host for the evening. Nathan Dueck enrolled in a course that Dennis Cooley taught at the University of Manitoba 17 years ago. He doesn't mean to brag, but he got a pretty good grade. A pretty good grade. No way to get a better grade, really. No, real A. Anyway, Nathan is the author of Kingsmere, which is published by Turnstone Press, who also published both these volumes this evening, and Hill, published by Peddler Press. His most recent book of poetry, A Very Special Episode, was published by Buckrider Books in 2019. Please join me in virtually welcoming Nathan Dueck.
Thank you so much, John. It is such a pleasure to be with you this evening, so much so that I can't even come to words. How do you introduce a fellow like Dennis Cooley? We'll get to that in a moment. Welcome to class, folks. It's good to see that you're all here. Now, don't feel bad if you haven't done the assigned reading, because some of the reading I've assigned just been shelved in the bookstore. Besides, we have someone here, a Dr. Cooley, who can help out with that reading part. And if you're good, I'll tell you the lesson that Cooley taught me, the lesson that I've never forgotten since he uttered the words into my ear. Tonight's class is coming to you from two places. You already heard from Treaty 1, the land where I was born and raised, but I'm presently speaking from the traditional unceded territory of the Ktunaxa and Kinbasket people. I'm in Cranbrook, British Columbia. There are 5 First Nation bands located within the regional boundary of what we settlers call the East Kootenays. 4 of these bands are Ktunaxa and 1 is Shuswap. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to both live and raise my family in this territory, which is affectionately known as Ktunaxa Makis. Now, I'm going to warm you up because I'm assuming you're coming to this reading cold. You may have been watching the news or doom scrolling. Now's your opportunity to relax and enjoy some poetry. I'm going to read 2 poems from my book, A Very Special Episode. This is the way that I looked when I wrote the book. This is how I look after several months of pandemic lockdown. I'm not aging well. The first poem I'm going to read is called Les Schtroumpfs. Les Schtroumpfs is also the way you can refer to the Smurfs. And I'm reading this poem with apologies to Marianne Moore. Plod, up teal sod, in a mushroom, one peacock blue Smurf occupies his home turf, concealing and flaunting himself like an eye spot fan. That magician who stalks Les Schtroumpfs from those woods summons nymphs, just for some love potions from his pot, spilt like plot twists. Gargamel, with poisonous self-love, succumbs to some elf. I'll get you, intimidating the Taupe Villa de Smurfen. So Peyo draws a wife from the comics, through cartoon life of the cells. Thereupon artists link oil paints, ink outline Smurfs' adventures, with sound effects synced with Prokofiev music, timing each frame by frame. All whimsical names, like Smurfette, make up a motif dialect. Smurfing grief, all Smurfy, Smurfish, Smurfiest. Merchandised smirch, called Smurfagetti, Smurfberry Crunch, ice shows, theme parks, spin-off PVC figurines dipped in lead, condemned Alchemy has sold the Smurfs to spoof how licenses child-proof the young. Those culprits age you. Now, that poem was about Smurfs, tiny woodland creatures, a couple apples high. That's the closest I could come to finding a poem that would complement the poetry that we're going to be hearing about later on today. You're going to be hearing about small beasts. You're also going to be hearing about fairy tales and fantasies. I'm going to try one more poem, hopefully to set the table for Cooley. One of the things that Cooley insisted upon us memorizing when we were his students is that poetry lives on the tongue. And if we forget that fact, it can die on the page. So I'm going to read a sonnet that I wrote for Spock. And the reason that this is noteworthy is because it's a sonnet in which every word contains the letter K. I wrote a series of 26 sonnets, and each sonnet is devoted to one letter and a pop culture figure. And this is the sonnet called Spock's Spoken Word Tracks. Hark! Freaky, dark, unmistakable tracks, rocketing amok like wicked Sputnik. Swank Spock's spoken words market awkward shtick, making trademark gimmicks, banking paychecks. Alack! Disc jockeys like Dreck, Spock kvetches. Fake funky racket, hokey rocky clack, shrieking, squeaking, squawking background music, mock heroic skits, hacky joke sketches. Skillful tracks acknowledge gawky klutzes, invoking skilled mind tricks, neck pinches, Spock-like, evoking wacky Klingon makeup kits. Frankly speaking, knowledge takes Kolinar. Schmucks speak malarkey, keep thinking kosher. Keen Spock talks remarkable folklore, schlock-like. And those were two selections from a very special episode, which I believe you can find at McNally Robinson, I hope. Now that's me. I'm an amateur. We're going to hear from a professional in a moment. In order to set the stage appropriately, I have to read a lengthy introduction. Now this is a lengthy introduction that I've lovingly prepared for Cooley because there's no other way to talk about him. How does somebody introduce Cooley? Why does he seem to prefer being called Cooley rather than Dennis? Why did he recoil every time I called him Professor? It's worth taking a moment to celebrate these new books and to appreciate his immense contributions to Canadian letters. Dennis Cooley is a poet, teacher, and literary critic of considerable renown. He is best known for formulating something known as vernacular poetry. He was a key figure in the evolution of the Prairie Long poem. He's also mentored generations, and I am not exaggerating, generations of poets from the prairies. As a grateful reader and one of his many eager students, that is what I call a literary legacy. Dennis was raised on a farm near the small city of Estevan, Saskatchewan, a home place that you can read about in the opening section of The Bestiary. After graduating with a bachelor's degree and a Master of Arts from the University of Saskatchewan, he completed a PhD at the University of Rochester. After a stint working as an executive assistant in the Blakeney government in Saskatchewan, he moved to Winnipeg, where he was a professor at St. John's College at the University of Manitoba for 35 years, as best I can count. Dr. Cooley helped to create the Manitoba Writers Guild in 1981. He also served as editor in various capacities for Arts Manitoba, the Journal of Canadian Fiction, Border Crossings, Pachyderm Press. He was a founding editor of the little turnkey Rolling Stone press called Turnstone, which he co-created in 1976. Cooley has published. Where do we even start talking about what Cooley has published? I mean, I don't even want to count the books that he's published. I don't want to feel so intimidated. For crying out loud, he's launching 2 books tonight, and he launched one earlier this season. I'm just going to list some of my favorites. Leaving, Turnstone 1980. Fielding, Thistledown 1983. Bloody Jack, Turnstone 1984, and University of Alberta 2002. Sunfall, His first selected and new poems was published by Nancy in 96, Irene, Turnstone 2000, The Bentleys, U Alberta 2006, by word of mouth. His second selected poems, which is edited by Nicole Marcotic, published by Wilfrid Laurier Press in 2007, The Stones, Turnstone 2013, Bestiary, University of Alberta 2014. His literary criticism includes The Vernacular Muse, Turnstone 1987, and The Home Place, Essays on Robert Croce's Poetry, published by University of Alberta in 2016. And I'm not even going to mention all the books that he edited. We just don't have that much time. It's remarkable also to note, as I was thinking about this earlier today, that the man is not cynical. He's published long, important books. He's neither cynical nor full of himself. I feel that's worth noting. Now, if any questions come to mind while he's reading, type them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that as we go along, and I'll pose them to Cooley a little later on. So now's the time. Let's launch the Bestiary and Cold Press Moon. 2 books at one time. Cooley is making us look bad. Are you there? There you are.
There I am. You're making me feel very old. You've run a long time.
You've earned it.
So thank you. Anyway, thanks for being here and being willing to do this. This is should be a whole lot of fun, and I'm grateful that you're the man who's doing this, Nathan.
So here's what I'm thinking we should do. We're going to save some questions until a little bit later. I would like to hear you read some of your poems. If you wouldn't mind, pick up the Bestiary and lay some of those on us.
I'll be happy to do that. Do you want me to say anything about them for now or just read them?
Oh, actually, yeah, sure. You can set them up. That sounds great.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to read a few from the Bestiary or Bestiary, which is a collection of animal poems. Most of the creatures in here are farm animals or small animals that you find in the city of Winnipeg parks, at the lake where you have a cottage. This started from way back. I had been writing with a fervor a series of crow poems. I got dozens and dozens of them. And I thought, well, what else have I got? I wrote bee poems, dozens and dozens of them, thinking I'm going to publish this book called The Birds and the Bees. But it kind of went sideways and moved into a whole series of other animal creatures. And so I'm going to read a few of those. The first one I'm going to read deals with pigs. If you've never dealt with pigs, you may think that they're stupid and offensive, and they can be certainly offensive, but they're not stupid. I rather like pigs, and I've got 2 pig poems in here. I'll read this one called Meanwhile Pigs. Talk. They don't keep much to themselves. Their bewhiskered ruminations on dung and flies. Cherish the close and convivial inquiries. Join in their songs of chop and dandelions. Daily probe the state of turnips. Consider with gravitas the bulge of cabbage. Old geezers on the porch sizing up the neighbors. Though genial in patience, the pigs rave and swear. Rains will wash over, just you wait and see the sun will surely hit in a splot, sweeter than a slop pail, full of rotten potatoes. Also, and not to be pooh-poohed, the flies will arrive in a strange sizzle, a hard lacquer in their gaze. The pigs will grow miscreant, tail twisting a giddy with all the guzzling and slurping, crazed with the delicacies, sucking them down, blue flies shiny as candies. And a gentler poem. This poem came from a story I heard on CBC, where I get a lot of good stuff. And this is basically based on the story I heard of this farm hen who raised some baby turkeys. Okay, so I may even have used the name But then anyway, the name of this poem and of this hen is Hetty. Hetty. An old hen barred, rock they called Hetty, Ms. Henrietta Lamour, and she was slow and lame. Also dingy among the persnickety birds, the henned chickens that mince and fluff and near disdain pick over the jewels. All day she scratched for a revelation. Under a glowering sun, lowered herself daintily into the powdered dirt, flocked like talcum around her. Appeared at my aunt's from a secret nest late last fall, 4 yellow dandelions behind her, the air stinky with burning grass, peeping their way to death. For some reason had also sat steadfast and brooding on a clutch of turkey eggs, spread herself like a contagion over their hugeness. Found as she must and must not have expected days later 5 puffs of gray, whose faltering she pecked and fretted over, 1 a penny, 2 a penny, and soon fell behind. A mother's worry when they rose from her, like beans in spring, hurried, their long-necked hunger past her short legs into the yard, twitching with bugs and scratches. Every evening brought their red rubber necks back to her, ducked and tucked close to her small, nervous head, her dusty hen smell, their soft bird sounds of meeting. And one last one from this collection. This is called A Small Memory. And as I'm reading it, you may suspect it doesn't belong here because there's no creatures. Well, hang on, you'll find out. The small memory is his grandma at a table, a silver thimble, a linen sampler, and an empty cup. A simple basket, and in it oranges and lemons, small sour suns, their bumps and nipples. A teapot brown table, maple, once black, once his grandmother's, warm in sun. And on it, 30 years later, a coffee cup, its handle, a looped shadow. An old lady time blows by, tall at 92 as she could be, the small wells worn into the stairs. Memory assists in her, palm flickers across the chairs, the tables, welts and scratches, and one deep gouge. All summer, bright spores drift over the wood, the window shining. The small memory is his grandma, bent, her silver fingers stiff and knuckled. Beside the cup, a silk thread, the exquisite corpse of a mosquito. So there are 3 from this collection, some kind of sampling. I like to think that I treat the creatures with a kind of humor and tenderness. Some of the creatures are pretty rowdy too.
I think what we're going to do now, I have a couple questions specifically related to the bestiary. So before you read from Cold Press Moon, I'd like to pose some of those to you. That's an interesting selection you chose because it demonstrates the breadth of your poetic voice. I mean, the last poem was a little bit melancholy, a little bit wistful.
Yeah.
But the first poem you read was friendly and warm and inviting. And I think when I'm idealizing the archetypal Dennis Cooley poem, those are the tones that you are most comfortable with. So I appreciated hearing you read them. On another note, I introduced you as a vernacular poet. Vernacular poet meaning that you write in the language of the common person, the languages that we're using right now. That remains the case with both of these books. But there are poems in the bestiary that did something you just did that I thought was really interesting. And that is you incorporated non-human sounds. A moment ago you were crowing like a rooster, but if you flip through the book, there are wasps buzzing. There are all manner of other sounds. Is this something that you spent time thinking about?
Well, yes and no. The thing is, when I grew up on the farm, I used to, this will sound funny, but I used to talk with the animals. And I was quite certain at the time, and I still am, and I am still, that actually we did talk sometimes. We could call cattle and they would call back. And I have a poem in here in which as the young farm kid talks to the pig and they carry on a conversation. The father shows up and he shakes his head. He's swear you were talking, the two of you. So there's that. I like imitating the sounds too. I guess the crow probably more than anything. And sometimes I've seen, it certainly looked to me like I made a crow very angry calling to it. It seemed to be very, very pissed off.
All this time I've been calling you Dr. Cooley when I should have been calling you Dr. Doolittle.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing in here, though, too, Nathan, is running through this collection that related, I guess, to the affection and the genial humor, what I take to be genial humor, is a sense of fellow creatureliness. We're all creatures. And so there is a sense of continuity and kinship, share things in common. I mean, I don't believe for a minute that I could understand the consciousness of another creature, as in being there and know what their experiences are. But I think you could connect with them in various ways. Certainly feel that way. And on the kind of farm I grew on, it was a small family farm, so you had animals around all the time, and a lot of them were basically pets. Have we got a poetry fan?
Yeah, my son just came to say hi. This is my son, Callum. Say hi.
Hello, hi, Kevin.
Callum, and I'm talking to. He's one of my professors.
Hello.
Okay, go to bed.
Okay,
I love you.
I'm not going to bed. We are looking for the animal.
Okay, now we've been attacked by both boys. It's good to see you, Toodaloo. Now, back to the point.
These guys are going to be bigger hits than the cats who show up in journalists' television screens.
What's interesting about what you just said also is that you were saying you were talking to the crows, and as far as I understand about crows are also mimicking the way that humans speak. So there's a bit of a conversation loop happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're just uncanny creatures.
You also in this collection, and this is really interesting, you transcribe sounds in a different way. You don't rely on the letters of our alphabet. You also move typography around the page. You illustrate noises in a way that can appear abrasive and kind of obnoxious to illustrate what it's like to be pursued by a wasp, for example. I thought that was really quite brilliant.
Yeah, that one actually I could never read. It's a visual poem.
I was going to ask you to read it.
It's a matter of repetition of certain letters and syllables again and again and again and again. So you can discern the words in there and say, there it is. The wasp at the shoulders, the neck, the head. But you can't read those as you would in a more traditional poem.
I heard an electric razor, like an old school electric razor. Okay, aside from that, another question. Following from Robert Croce's observation that naming is an act of creation, something that he returned to often in his writing, I don't have to tell you that, the poems in the Bestiary, specifically in archaeology, the section called archaeology, don't impose names on their subject as much as observe what the subjects name themselves. So it's as though this section is written through close observation. And I thought you could tell us a little bit about how you came to that form of observation. Do you just have a memory for the way that animals sound, or is this something that you observe daily on the regular?
I don't understand. You're asking about what names the animals have, the creatures have?
Well, it's as though they are themselves naming themselves, or giving you their names, giving you their language to speak with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, some of them are pretty quiet too. A lot of it's just movement. The birds don't make, in these poems, they don't make a lot of sounds. But that's a good part of the observation, though, that where those creatures, or the sounds they make, but the motion was a good part of it. The birds moving through the yard, those individual birds, different species, move very differently.
Where do you go to see the flora and fauna of Winnipeg? Where do you go to see it?
Well, a lot of this comes from Winnipeg Beach. We have a cottage at Winnipeg Beach. So several of the scenes came out of there. There's one variety of birds who come, it's a dry summer, and I got the sprinkler pumping away in the backyard from our well, and the birds are coming. So the birds come at different times, and they behave differently, but they're bird villains here. The grackles show up and they're Nazi stormtroopers. They come in, wade in, and just put the run on all the other birds. So a lot of the creatures came from time at the cottage. Sometimes our backyard, the squirrels show up, the blue jays show up here.
Yeah.
The groundhogs, I got a couple of groundhogs, lovely creatures. One little guy who just came and lay on our front step, the sun, just lay there.
I'm hearing you now talk about Animal Farm as you're talking about the grackles. We have some other questions that just showed up. A question by an anonymous attendee asks, how are animals mirrors to humans?
How are they nearest?
Mirrors, like reflections.
Well, the strongest experience I ever had with that, I think, was a baby raccoon that we raised. We found it in our fireplace, and the mother must have got scared and left it. We fished it out. It came out like a mouse, and we raised it for the summer. And he was by far the smartest animal I've ever seen. And maybe because he was raised with us, but he had all kinds of what seemed like firm human gestures and understanding. He would like to get into things. You'd see him at flowers. He's about to grab a flower, and he'd say, "George," and he would look like a little kid. Oh, so he had remarkable human qualities. He could recognize voices, and do a lot of calculating and figuring out how to make his way through the world. But his range of voices astonishing. I guess that maybe is one of the examples you're thinking of. He makes an enormous number of sounds.
He also has opposable thumbs. Like, that's the most human. Okay.
Tight, soft, very soft.
Another question comes from Jan Horner. Jan asks, can you talk a little more about what fascinates you or attracts you to crows?
Their energy, their intelligence, and they're kind of somebody belligerence, but their kind of audacity, their presence, that they seem to be able to handle any situation. And the more you find out about them, the more you realize that they can and then some. They are wonderful workers with tools, but it's just, I guess, the presence, and there's so much of the prairie too, that how many birds do you see under various circumstances? The crow is always there.
I'm convinced that the crows are ravens in the Western Canada. That we think of crows the way that Americans think of ravens, or they appear in romantic poetry, because crows populate everything written in this.
Tricksters too, aren't they? They actually are in life tricksters.
Yeah, there are incredible tales in the land I'm living in now about the crows appearing and warning and teasing the people who cross paths with them.
Yeah. Not for anybody.
Dr. Jay Gamble weighs in with this question. First of all, he says, "Congratulations, Cooley. I was wondering if you think that the appearance of animals and farm animals is endemic to Canadian prairie poetry. I'm thinking specifically of Pamela Banting's essay on the semiotics of the small mammals in the work of Crouch."
I'm sure she's right. But it sounds like she's done a lot more thinking about this than I have. I try to remember, doesn't Pam talk mostly about gophers in there?
Alison Calder, Dr. Alison Calder has published about gophers specifically.
Yeah, but it is interesting how many horses are out there. The cattle certainly. There's there cattle in mine. I was very fond of them too, but I don't know how to feel that. I just don't know enough. I'm sure she's right if she's worked this out. But sorry, Jade, I wish I had a better answer for you.
Another person who blurbed the book, Aretha Van Herk, has published about the horse and the house as a foundational structuring principle in Western Canadian literature written by men. So you are not at a loss. There are many horses parading across our literature. Another question, this one's from Ted Landrum. It says, "Poets are animals too." Thanks for reminding us. Do your beastly poems have an Aesopic dimension? Are you telling us fables?
Well, yeah. Yeah, pretty clearly. I mean, the talking animal is clearly a fabled creature, and most of these creatures do talk, or at least Cooley thinks they talk. In his poems, they talk. And what kind of ethical conclusions might you come to if that's necessary part of the fable? Again, I'd say part of a shared creatureness, where we are, as you said, as Ted was saying, we're animals. I prefer the term creature or fellow creatures, and that I think that kind of moves the weight in this a lot more gently and evenly and respectfully among us.
I can't avoid hearing and thinking of beasts of burden. Every time I see the word beast, even in the bestiary, I'm thinking, what sort of burden is this book carrying for us? Actually, Jonathan Ball, Dr. Jonathan Ball, pointed out that crows perform funeral rites and have been shown to have the ability to think about their own thoughts. So they have metacognitive abilities. I can't think of a better. It should be on all of our money and Canadian paraphernalia. Our flag should have a crow on it. Jonathan Ball also asks, how much research do you do for a book? You don't have to research anymore. You're retired. So do you do any formal research when you're writing these books?
Well, there's a difference between research you do as a scholar and research you do as a poet. Now, they can be related. And for me, these things always move back and forward. So I'm always doing research about writing theories and studies of form and structure, that sort of thing. And that can move back and forth between being a reader of text, a writer about text, and a writer of them. So they're interconnected, but you do research all the time. I prefer researching for your own writing because the rules get a little wider. So you don't have to get things just so the way you would a scholar. So maybe I got the wrong color with that dog, but that's not going to matter in my poem probably. I may even get lucky and the mistake may even take me somewhere. But when you're here making these claims as a scholar, you got to run those down and get them exact, and that can be actually tedious sometimes. But it can be similar. You're reading, saying, "What's there that I could take away and run with that could speak to me in some way or other?" But mostly, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that sort of research is the magpie approach to research, where you pick out what you can from what you're reading and use what you will, and the next time you build your nest. Yeah,
exactly.
I quite like that. Damon Kindop asks a great question. Given your fondness for pigs, and I'm going to interject here by saying, who is not fond of pigs? Pigs have human eyes. Anyway, given your fondness for pigs, this question pertains to pigskin, Uncle Dennis. Any plans to publish an anthology on the Saskatchewan Rough Rider poems?
I got to expose this man is my nephew. So he's got inside knowledge here. So no, thanks, Damon. I'm not about to do this, but I did once write a Saskatchewan Rough Rider, a football poem, and I gave it to a fellow poet who was at the same event I was at. He said, "I'm going to a school. Can I use this?" So sure, go ahead. And he came back shaking his head. He said he didn't understand a word in it. They couldn't see the football in it. So maybe I would have no luck at this day, man. But it's a good idea. Somebody should do it.
Somebody should do it, because I can name poems about baseball. I can name poems about hockey, but I can't think of a single poem about football right now.
There's not a lot. Not a lot.
I think you just wrote your next book.
Well, I got a few baseball poems. I wrote a baseball poem about the SDN Maple Leafs. I had a poem about baseball in the 1930s, small towns in Saskatchewan.
Baseball is the poetic sport, and I'm not going to broach any objection to this. I think the rest of my questions can wait after we hear a little bit of Cold Press Moon. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd really quite like to hear from this.
Good. What do you think of the title?
I love it. I thought it's a great title.
Yeah, I like it too.
How'd you come to it?
Well, there's a big debate about this. They were trying out one thing or another, and And I think it was almost desperation. I said, jotting down possibilities. I said, what about this? And almost nobody liked it but me. But I truculently persevered, and they couldn't think of a better title. So that's what we ran with. But I like it. I'm glad we got
You get 10 poet points from me.
it.
I'll be quiet now.
Yeah. Okay, this one, I'm going to read you pieces, from longer poems. Many of the pieces in this book are long. And I think it would take too much of our time to read one that goes on and on. But I'm going to take some brief sections. This is called Return, but it comes from a much longer poem called The Lost Children. Okay. So this is part of a poem about the Hansel and Gretel and the witch stories. Okay, it's called The Return. Night wind, a moon, rain at the window. The porch light clicks on, offers its little planet of warmth. And now children up the walk, running, children running. The father looks up, sees them, his children, Hansel and Gretel running. The father calls, Hansel, Gretel, his voice on the cold night, Hansel, Gretel. There is a high whooshing and they are running. It is raining the color of colostrum. Car lights moving in rain, lay down cellophane before them, bright red entrails they drag behind, beautiful in the film that runs through his head. They leave phosphorescent slugs stuck to the curbs, the drains, the eaves running over. Light splashes where he walks and stops, sticks the weak light from his hand out into the night, his children. Then he is running too, and the children, dragging their broken wings, all three up the road, down the road, up the stones, the moon, the wind, the slap of their steps, the steep rain in their faces, their suddenness splashing and running together toward. Water in the curbs, tears. The father too, the father weeps. He weeps for his children and for himself and for his sidewalks that hold up. I'm not going to read anymore. Sorry. I'm going to read something else. He's a sad man. Let me read you this. 2/3 of the sun. But before this is what happens. I lean over to kiss the lips cold as an ossuary, yet I must do this. This is why I have come, why I was sent. You insist that I do. Perhaps the young men tried to break through, that the roast might sizzle, the flies might crawl, that men and women might meet in stables, that girls in scullery might eat fried drumsticks, children collect stones and string, that people might wade through time, wake in time to time happening over and over again. No, only the old man said, you must kiss her, you must kiss the briar girl, he said. When you find her years from now, in tears they will tell stories on you, and yet you must do this. You will not want to do this, the old man said, and he is right, I do not want to. It doesn't help when I find the girl, frog belly white from years that drained her, tartar teeth, clothes soaked with water, her face stained, mineral deposits on a pump. And it could be back with Michael, drinking, talking, stories of horses and music and women. Lean over the wax, lethargic as a slug. Answer to chemicals the world swirls within. A cold mucus to awaken. She does not want this either, wants only to sleep, to lie still, simple as ether, to be winter, to be no more. Then the wind, when it is clear, there is no wind. Blow on the others too, though they are not pleased either altogether. I blow their stillness off them, cause them to move, waken them into death. Have only this excuse, that I have left my friends down the hill that feels when they turn over smell of earth and in fall of wheat ripening. This is why I do it, that milkmaids might milk, that cows give milk, that at night when the moon is out, cows jump each month floods, reliable as a carburetor, estrus erupts, bloody egg. Do it for the family of red-winged blackbirds that drop into the marshes every summer to feed. Do it because it brings us around 2/3 of the sun, because when the moon closes its eye, I watch the mascara of your sleeping. So there's some, sorry. Sorry. That's from Cool Press Moon. Would you like me to read something else?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. What have we got here? Okay. Snow White, her complexion. Why is it I must be untutored as snow? You would have me white with abstinence and disappear behind my skin. The veins of my breasts blue as skim milk, the blouse a bruise on my body. It is parchment you want. Your words you can write there and scrape clean scraps to be discarded. This is some kindness you show me, my husband, when you want a perfect complexion. A faceless face curdled as whey you make up over and over the smell of rye and absinthe on your breath. Offer me only the blizzard of your inattention. Winter sucks on our bones, threatens with freezer burns. It could have been sunny, my love, we once held there, burning our hands, buzzing in bed. So, got me some questions.
I sure do have questions, but I'm going to, before I get to the formal prepared questions, ask about sad men. Because a moment ago you said that there were sad men in these poems, and that is apparent from reading them. Could you explain a little bit why sad men was a preoccupation in this book?
Well, I don't know if it's a preoccupation. There are other men too. There's some very ugly and nasty and mean men in here too.
Let's not talk about
and,
them.
Yeah, and some who are just buffoons who aren't quite so vicious as incompetent and patronizing. So there are kind of range of them, but two of the, well, actually three of them I think I'm pretty sympathetic with. This last figure, I guess it would be apparent, is the figure who comes to, the prince who comes to Sleeping Beauty, a variation on this, that the various versions of what that figure is and what he represents. And here, saying he doesn't want to do this. This is very unpleasant. It has no part of him. He's forced to do it against all his pleasures and instincts. Hardly the figure that we get either in the conventional understanding of the fairy tale or in some more recent versions of it, that he's this kind of a cynical opportunist and who abuses the woman. So maybe it's a moment of redress, perhaps a little bit. And we have the father, obviously, in the Hansel and Gretel story. But another strange figure is the one in Rumpelstiltskin, a strange, grotesque little guy who I had kind of a sympathy for. He's madly in love with the woman who's imprisoned to spin the straw into gold. And he has this terrible recurring longing for her that's very tender. At least I think it is. I wrote it with that intention. I think it is that. So we kind of working on the genders in various ways in the text. I mean, I think a lot of the poems are very sympathetic with female figures, though some of the female figures are not attractive either. One of them is arguably a misanthrope. But there's a kind of range of roles in which male and female figures play different roles, have various qualities in their relationships. And so I guess I just wanted want to see a little tenderness in the men.
You know, it's interesting you say that. Just as you were speaking about sad men, I was thinking of the Bentley poems that you'd published that are not very sympathetic to the men. But I'm preparing to teach As for Me in My House next term, and I took a look at your book earlier this week, and you do have a lot of sympathy for seemingly unsympathetic people in the source text. I mean, Sinclair Ross couldn't muster as much empathy for the men as you do in that book.
Yeah. The well, I think that book is pretty. My book is pretty sympathetic to the women too. I mean, that central
Absolutely, yes.
consciousness is hers. But yeah, the male figure in Ross, I think is in many ways a kind of very lonely figure, and I mean, it's obviously very hard for his wife, but it's probably no easier for him in the position that he's in, that they're in.
I don't mean to make this into a class about Canadian literature, so we're going to move on. Earlier, we talked about Aesop briefly, and oftentimes animals are seen as an opportunity to share fables. This book is about folk tales and fairy tales, and we've used fairy tales in our culture, we've heard since the Grimm's fairy tales, to inculcate our young people in a moral way of being or to warn them of evils that are coming. Do you feel like you were thinking at all about this as a moral or a fable for contemporary readers?
Well, I think a couple of them are. I mean, the ones in which the male figures appear as particularly offensive and threatening would be that the one called Rose Red, I think, develops that sense of a terrible and repulsive kind of male sexuality, and the Bluebeard poems, the figure that is trying to silence and contain the female figures that hopes to speak and act.
You know, this is a bit of a leap. It's a bit of a jump, but I think one of the things in this text that I thought was interesting is that you write the character of Cooley. He, in Cold Press Moon, Cooley appears, and it's a kind of a meta character. How do you characterize yourself in a book about fairy tales where some things are not to be believed and some things are not to be appreciated? Why did Cooley appear?
I got the idea of the author's character, or at least was excited by the example of the poet from BC who does the labor poems, Wayman, Tom Wayman.
Okay,
Wayman appears as a figure. Wayman is right as editing in Colorado or whatever, and I love that idea. Which you have this figure who's related to you, but is far from identical with you. But you had some connections with him always, and he often appears as a kind of figure who's fumbling and kind of trying to make his way through the world with some bewilderment and surprises. So I kind of like that. Again, I think I treat that character with a kind of tender comedy.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's the Schlemiel or the Schlemazel, but he's definitely fooling his way around.
Yeah.
We have some really good questions here, and I'm grateful that we've had so many people pose them. It says here, this is from Russ Ricky. It says, "Congrats, Cooley. It's so good to hear and see you again." I would echo those comments. "I hear place, prairie, the West seep through your lines in your retelling of the fairy tales. How essential is your setting to these poems? Is it a character?"
Oh, I'm trying to think that. I mean, clearly a very quotidian world steps into them, but I'm just thinking of the father and the porch light and the cars. So you're in a contemporary world, obviously, that invades a world from centuries ago, but that wouldn't make it particularly pretty, I don't think. You certainly get it with the animals, I think, the farm animals at least, saying they're occupying a kind of space that, at least in my memory, now this might work for readers, but in my memory is very rooted. The pigs talking came from an actual event in my life where Vig's there, I'm there, and my dad's there. So some of the stuff has come out of that kind of personal experience of creature on the prairies. But whether they're marked as being particularly prairie, I really don't know. That I would be, I would be, I think, happy if they were. I haven't thought about that. Maybe Russ can tell us.
You have an assignment. Your homework's due next week.
Yeah.
There's a severe marking curve. Jonathan Ball just asked another question. It's a good one because it's about form. And I love to hear this because I want to know what goes into your poem sequencing. How do you decide on the order of the poems in a book?
Well, I take advice pretty heavily here. When I write, I tend to pig-headedly go ahead and write my poems and often to be kind of ridiculously, there they are. I mean, I'm happy for good advice, but I tend to be a little bit stubborn at that point. But I am happy to get advice about sequencing. So I certainly, as I recall, got some good advice on that. Part of what I try to do with them is to try and get a change of pace on them. That rather than bank up a whole conglomeration of whatever here and then a whole conglomeration here, to kind of move in and out from say tonally or thematically or rhythmically or whatever. So some of the poems are in the Bestiary. That there's a first set in that book called, what do we call it? Young Man's Eden.
Yes,
Young Man's
right.
Eden. So I did those kind of deliberate, that notion in mind. I had a kind of gopher poem. I thought, well, what can I do with this? So the sense of the creatures and some kind of beatitude. So I wrote a set of pieces off that, and they gave me a set. But I didn't. I wanted to then move on to pieces that would be a little more graphic or a little more comical or whatever. So change of pace as much as anything.
How about the last poem? When you set the schedule, how do you know what's your last poem in the book?
I often don't. What I often will do is to make it a meta poem about ending the book.
Oh, good.
So I did that in a couple of poems, including, say, the Dracula poems I did.
On that note, I thought you'd cover your Dracula poems base with Seeing Red. Dracula shows up again here.
Overflow. It's over, yeah.
Actually, it's interesting. It's interesting to read these books with your other books in my mind because I see references to all sorts of other people. The Bentleys even show up in Cold Press Rune. Old Drac appears from Seeing Red. I made a list of all of your intertexts. Overflow is the reason why.
Yeah. Well, sometimes if you got a poem, or you got a set here, I'm working with notion of a book. I'm not writing poems, I'm writing a book of poems, right? So you say, I want relatedness here. Okay, what have I got? Have I got anything else? So what's in that folder? What have I got anything else about animals? Put on a search. So I go looking and I will gather from elsewhere too, to some extent. So and some of them carry traces, as you picked up. There's a reference to a character, isn't there, from the Bentley poems? Yeah.
I'm going to ask one last question, and it's a philosophical question, so you can take it where you want.
Okay.
It's by Carmelo Militano, and it's a good one. How much does accident or serendipity play a part in the playfulness of your work?
Enormous lot.
Yeah,
enormous lot. A good part of what drives him is rhyme. The similarities of sound. I got hiccup. We're going to go for this hiccup, hop, hop. You start playing with this hip hop, ship shape, and you can often kind of run from there and start to build from there. You revise like crazy and move things in and out, but a lot of them are what words may suggest off their sound and the rhythm to a great extent. But I also then go looking, saying, what else is possible here from research? But chance play is there enormously. Rhyme is probably a major principle.
That sounds like you said it to me 17 years ago, that this is play, that this is fun. And that has been the lesson I've taken from you and other instructors, is that if you're not playing with language, what are you doing here? This is fun stuff. Now,
Yeah, there's
I
enough
have
pain and disappointment.
I have nothing left to say. I've said my piece.
Well,
What
thank you.
what would you have us think about at the end of your reading here? What's the last thought you'd like for us to dwell on?
Wait, are we going to questions here? Is it?
We have a couple more questions if you want. I
I
don't
see a
mind
batch
asking.
down there. And in fact, on my
Oh,
screen.
do you? Okay. How about this one? Let's call this the end then. Jay Gamble comes back because you can't keep that guy down.
And shaking.
Both with the animal sounds in Bestiary and what I guess I would call the kind of sonic stitching in the poems you read from Cold Press Moon. How much does sound play into your composition?
The cold press moon. Those things work very close. Rhythmically is a good part of it. The cold press moon.
There we go.
This is flowing into this, and so the syntax starts to become pretty plastic and off a very conservative traditional grammar would be ungrammatical even. There's a moving into the rhythm that's very much a part of that piece I was trying to read.
Let's see here. Okay, there's actually one. Okay, I promise we'll end this soon. This is from Dana Cooley, someone I'm assuming you have a relationship with. How does listening as an act or as a responsibility play into your work?
How does listening as an act?
As an act, as a responsibility, play into your work?
Well, I think quite a bit, but in these poems, it's I'm probably not understanding the question very well here, but listening in these animal poems is different than listening to people. I mean, being kind of patient and silent with ever. So say yeah, but listening to animals, listening to people maybe are quite the same thing. I want to say, and I do say yes, it's strong, but I don't know what to do with that any further. Dana, we'll have to talk about that. I didn't do well on that one.
Not to make this too academic, but Jacques Derrida mentioned that if animals were speaking, we humans would never listen. We wouldn't know how to do it. So that's it. Let's have our last word. Professor Cooley, what's our last word?
Well, my last word is of thanks to you for doing this so well, so ably. And thanks to the bookstore, McNally Robinson, John Tays, who's overseeing these things with wisdom and grace and generosity. Thanks to Turnstone for doing these books and working painstakingly on them for years. Thanks to readers of poetry. And thanks to those who tuned in here. I hope it's okay for you. It's yours now.
And thank you so much, Dennis. That was a really wonderful evening of conversation. So I'm very grateful to you both for that. And to all you fine folks out in the audience for your questions. I'd just like to offer a few very quick closing comments. One is that copies of both of Dennis's new books are available at McNally Robinson Booksellers. You can order them online, over the phone. You can come in and visit us in a very socially distanced and safe manner. Dennis stopped by earlier today and signed piles of books. So we have a whole lot of signed Cooley on our shelves and available. We also have, as proof of life, copies of Nathan Dueck's latest book here at the store as well. So if you're interested in that, please do come and pick it up. I'd like to continue the gratitude a little bit. I'd like to sincerely thank Nathan Dueck for coming on board to host this event with such aplomb. It was a great pleasure to have you on board again. Enormous thanks to Dennis for writing these incredible collections. I just realized that the 28th of this month marks 11 years to the day that I first heard Dennis read from Seeing Red at a Turnstone Press Halloween event that we had at McNally Robinson when I just got hired. And it really reconfigured what I thought poetry could do. And hearing Dennis in particular read was a really eye-opening experience and led me to encounter some of his other incredible work, the vernacular muse in particular, that just opened my mind and opened my sense of poetry. So I'm grateful to that, for all the work that you've done, Dennis, and particularly for these two new wonderful volumes. And I'm so incredibly grateful to all of you for joining us here this evening and for your questions, your comments. After this event is over, we're going to stop broadcasting, and I'm going to copy some of the lovely things you said about Dennis from the chat and then email them to him. So if there's anything you'd like to say, please feel free to put it in there. Otherwise, thanks again to Turnstone Press for helping to put on this evening. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Take care.